ゲームじゃない感じに仕上げたいっていうような、ゲームなんですけど、ゲームやってたっていう感じよりもなんか違うものが残ってほしいなっていうような、感覚ですかね。僕ほら、例えばゲームっていろんなものがあるし、スポーツゲームもあれば、パズルみたいなのもあるしっていう、そういうものの、なんていう要素をもう何でもかんでも吸収しちゃうようなゲームなところがあるので、ゲームをしてるんだけれども、いろんなことの体験をしてって最後にその物語全部が集約し、一つ終わりを迎えるみたいな、そういうような遊びともつかないしゲームともつかないし、何だったんだろうこれは、なんかその疑似体験としてなんか面白いものを経験しちゃったなみたいな、そういう感覚で終われるものになってくれればいいなといつも思ってますね。だからゼルダは何でも吸収できるし、何をやってもゼルダとも言えるし、うまいことをやらないとゼルダと言ってもらえないみたいな変な側面もあるし、なんかね、変な不思議なゲームです。はい。
Eiji Aonuma's 5 directed Zelda games are a very over-discussed topic, like, in general. For reasons that we're going to get into, it's important to a lot of people to control the narrative about them, which you might also suspect this video is going to be an attempt at. What I would say is that these games are not perfect. They've got filler and problems. Even if they didn't, the medium is still very young, so making grand declarations about it wouldn't be enduring or impressive. So for the longest time, I never felt the need to say anything. But I realize now that most Zelda fans understand small surface level things, but in the end, they just can't see the forest for the trees. The director's intended interpretation ends up getting the same amount of focus and respect that some fan theory would. They like it, they think it's fun, but optional. Some people still believe it to be unfounded. Nobody's as angry as they really should be. They seem to think that everyone is just entitled to their opinion, which is textbook cowardice. I thought that I could organize things a little better, but I really can't afford to. I promise by the end of it, I really do address everything, but I won't explain it in ludicrous detail, because I'm not trying to sell you on a stupid fan theory. None of this is a theory. It's not apologetic in any way, and it isn't my opinion poorly disguised as a retrospective. This is simply The Legend of Zelda as it was intended by Eiji Aonuma. Now, before I say anything about anything, I need to address all the common misconceptions that I possibly can. For Zelda, the very best source of misconceptions is Matthew Matosis, a painfully condescending YouTube critic.
The story sets itself up to be a prequel to every other Zelda game to date, but doesn't accomplish anything with it. The most shocking revelation in the game is that Zelda is actually the reincarnated form of the goddess Hylia, a character who had never even been mentioned before until the intro to Skyward Sword.
Starting with the basics, the very first Zelda timeline was published in this Famitsu article in 1991. Eiji Aonuma was hired in 1988, but wouldn't join the Zelda team until the absolute earliest, 1996. A Link to the Past is mostly Takashi Tezuka's game, but the game's manual was written by Koizumi, who would later go on to co-direct the 64 Zeldas and direct the first 3 3D Mario titles. So the timeline in this article is most likely by Koizumi.
Okay, so you've got Zelda 3 at the top, and then it says the original Zelda makes her first appearance. And then it also says Link's ancestor, ? Then after that, it just says Nagai Nengetsu, I think, which is just like a long period of years and months. That's all it is.
It's interesting here that Koizumi is saying A Link to the Past is a time jump prequel to Zelda 1. Aonuma must have really loved this idea, because when he was brought on, he repeated it. Twice. When we get into later the boundaries of Aonuma's creative control, this will be an important thing to go back over because it shows the line between what he inherited and how he retooled it to fit his purposes. In 2002, following the release of The Wind Waker, Aonuma would give this quote in a GamePro article. The GamePro article itself is lost to time from what I can tell, but it's been archived in this issue of Nintendo Power. Where does The Wind Waker fit in the overall Legend of Zelda timeline? In terms of the storyline, we've decided that this takes place 100 years after the events in Ocarina of Time. We think that as you play through the game, you'll notice that the beginning of the story explains some of the events in Ocarina of Time. You'll also find hints of things from Ocarina of Time that exist in The Wind Waker. There's also a more complicated explanation. If you think back to the end of Ocarina of Time, there were two endings in that game in different time periods. First, Link defeated Ganon as an adult, and then he actually went back to being a child. You could say that The Wind Waker takes place 100 years after the ending in which Link was an adult. Now that's pretty descriptive on its own, but if you need proof of his consistency on this issue, he says a similar thing in Nintendo Dream number 154, which was transcribed and archived to Ninja.com in 2006. Fair warning, I can't read Japanese, and Google Translate doesn't handle this very well. Windtact is parallel. Isn't it back to the childhood when Link flies to the world 7 years later at Ocarina and defeats Ganon? Twilight Princess is a world 100 and several years after a peaceful childhood. In the last scene of Ocarina of Time, Link and Princess Zelda come back as children to have a conversation. It is this story that the story's result is a little dragging that the relationship between the three with Ganon goes in different directions. In the middle of the work, there's a scene where Ganon is executed. If you leave him alone, he will be executed because he is a sacker to do ridiculous things later. So that scene is a few years after Ocarina. So the executed Ganon was sent to a world and this time trying to get that power. There's plenty of old message boards of people reacting to the Famitsu article getting published elsewhere, most famous of which is AVGN's video, which he published on Cinemassacre.com in 2009. It's so weird to me that timeline deniers nowadays try to retroactively say that the chronology was somehow made up for Hyrule Historia in 2011. It's something that Aonuma had discussed for 2 decades at that point, and everybody else at the time was clamoring about it. It's probably the easiest lie to disprove that you could think of. I also found a Reddit post showing a magazine from October 2011 out of context in order to say that the timeline still isn't official. Meanwhile, Hyrule Historia released in December 2011. So it was a secret in October, but by December it was no longer a secret. I don't think that anyone actually bought this one, but I thought I would mention it while we're here because it's pretty funny.
At the start of the Minish Cap, there's an opening sequence detailing a previous incarnation of Link and shows that he wasn't wearing a hat. In the grander scheme of the Zelda timeline, the Minish Cap was basically an origin story for Link's hat, which was a fun idea. It was executed extremely well, and by the end of the game it was nice to know that the hats of the various Links worn through the years were a sort of unknowing tribute to Ezlo. Skyward Sword undoes the entire point of this game. If Skyward Sword actually cared at all about being faithful to the timeline, then Link wouldn't be wearing a hat, which would have been an extremely easy change to make, and might have even made his design more interesting.
I won't get into this too much in this video because we're focusing on Eiji Aonuma's directed Zelda games and his story intentions for them. But yes, he does include games on his chronology that he had zero involvement in, and that much is a little confusing, understandably. I'm not going to say that these games aren't canon to each other, but if you think about it, or even if you don't, there's no possible way that these games could ever have any significant story connection. That's not what the timeline is about. The timeline is about how Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, and Skyward Sword all would connect to Ocarina and Majora. As Eiji Aonuma developed his story, these were the only parts that he was really concerned about. There's 100-year time jumps between each hero, stretching 200 years, and the implication when you create any story with time jumps is that the events in between aren't significant. Nothing can happen after Ocarina of Time for a while because Ganon is sealed away, and etc., etc. So, these are the games on the timeline. Again, I'm not saying they aren't canon, but they are superfluous, which is supported by the fact that nobody ever mentions the Minish or Vaati or any of that stuff. None of this is confusing as long as you have a basic comprehension of time travel and you don't poke holes in it like a contrarian.
If they use the same logic as the Song of Storm scenario, then the plants would always be grown in the future because the game would assume that young Link would plant them in the past. If the Song of Storm scenario worked by the logic used on the plants, then the guy couldn't possibly have taught Link the song in the future until young Link played it in the past. Basically, all of this is to say that the time travel in Ocarina of Time probably wasn't thought out to a huge degree, and the developers simply went with whatever they thought was a good idea for certain parts of the game. When you look at the Magic Beans and the Song of Storms, they're both good ideas and I like the way they play with the time travel. The problem is they're incompatible with each other.
What Matthew really wants when he says that Minish Cap is a better prequel than Skyward Sword is for fans to be able to make creative changes to the story, and not the person directly responsible for that story. And well, that's problematic.
The reveal that Tetra is Zelda is perhaps the least thought out moment in any Zelda story ever. As soon as she's revealed to be the princess, the King of Red Lion starts referring to her as Zelda for no reason. Presumably names in the Zelda universe work the same way they do in the real world. Presumably Tetra has been going by the name Tetra for as long as she's been alive. It's even left ambiguous about whether or not she knew about her heritage at all, so why then is she suddenly renamed Zelda as soon as she discovers her lineage? This alone might not seem so bad, maybe we could assume that her name was Zelda all along and Tetra just an alias, but her clothes are suddenly replaced and she seems to undergo a complete personality change. She's no longer a freewheeling, aggressive pirate, but suddenly seems to be a refined, caring princess. Even if we go out on a limb and assume that Zelda's personality somehow awakened inside of Tetra, then that's a pretty terrible fate in and of itself. It's as though Tetra was just a vessel to be overwritten.
Does it not occur to Matthew that just because an event takes place later in the story, that doesn't necessarily mean that the storyteller came up with it later? I mean, think about it. Even if you don't know anything about Zelda, this information is obviously important to the ending of the game. He says that this moment isn't thought out, but he doesn't provide any evidence for that claim. Does he know who created the story? Can he provide evidence that they didn't think about it? Obviously not. He's just saying that to him, the scene doesn't feel like it was thought out. By definition, this can't be a shoehorn if that's what he always planned to do. I mean, it's made up, but everything's made up. So yeah, Tetra isn't real, Zelda isn't real. These are fictional stories. Again, what is this guy even talking about?
The more likely answer is this is simply a shoehorned reference to Ocarina of Time, one of many that are in the Wind Waker for seemingly no reason at all. There's no time travel in the Wind Waker, Link has no connection to the previous one apart from his clothes, the game doesn't even take place in Hyrule, not as we know it anyway. Overall, the references to the Hero of Time and all that stuff feel pretty forced, and the Koroks and the Rito are the two worst examples. The idea of setting a game and was essentially a post-apocalyptic scenario of Hyrule is wonderful, but its attempts to continue on from Ocarina of Time seem incredibly half-assed and not very well thought out.
It's pretty inappropriate to say that the races in Wind Waker need to have firmer connections to their Ocarina counterparts in order to be a fitting conclusion to the story. Their connections are loose on purpose. They had to endure the onslaught of a reawakened Ganon and then a giant flood. It's completely believable that they'd lose the majority of those ties. Actually, this is just a total misunderstanding of not only the plot, but also the themes and morals of the game. The point that Aonuma is trying to make with the Wind Waker, generally speaking, is that you should accept the past for what it is and build a better future. All the people, Hylians, Rito, Koroks, they've shed their connections to the old world, and now live in peace above the waves, just as the gods wanted. Ganon insists that this was a cop-out, and that the gods refused to save their people, but it's not true. They did what they could. Ganon's whole motivation in this game is to destroy the new world in wake of reviving the old one. He's trading all of his tomorrows for a single yesterday, and defending himself to the detriment of the rest of the world. And you don't need an art book recapping that information to understand it properly. It's explicitly told to you in dialogue. And again, none of this is a fan theory. It's just what's in the games. Going back to what I said earlier about extraneous titles, Matt even complains about Phantom Hourglass for this very reason.
The ending to the game sees Hyrule washed away with the kids' future left in their own hands. We know now that the story continues on in two direct sequels to The Wind Waker, those being Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks, but taken on its own, I think this would have made a fitting ending to the entire Zelda saga. Games could have still been set before The Wind Waker to allow the series to continue, and some are, but The Wind Waker itself would have made a nice conclusion to the series as a whole. Ganon, Hyrule and the Master Sword are all lost beneath the waves, and life moves on. It would have made for a nice ending.
And he catches it here. But again, he's only applying this logic when it suits his opinion.
It would almost be as incredibly stupid as the King of Hyrule passionately telling the children at the end of the Wind Waker that their new land won't be Hyrule, because he wanted the past washed away. And then, within a few years, they discover a new continent. Guess what they call it?
Adding any kind of character depth or world building or some other literal element, you might take that as an improvement to the story, but actually it makes it less concise. Instead of it being about this emotional tug and pull about the morality of family versus future, you're erasing that and just boiling Hyrule down into any other fantasy world that you would use to escape your adult responsibilities. The point is instead to take these morals to heart and apply them to your adult life. Lorne Lanning, I think, is one of the first game developers to actually take himself seriously. In the 90s, he was forced to make a bunch of games out of contract, but now that he's gotten out of that contract, he's finally self-publishing, so he can take his time between releases. Most developers, like Eiji Aonuma for example, don't have that luxury, because the authority of an artist's influence on a work is considered a threat to the authority of a corporation who only sees art as an entertainment product. Which is especially pernicious in computer games, because the entire industry right now is centered around the idea that games are only escapist toys. When Lanning conceived Oddworld basically as a movie, he turned the idea into a video game for budgeting reasons.
That's amazing. Let's make 5 movies. And I was like, no, we're going to make 5 games because 5 movies is going to cost at least $500 million. And who's going to give us that? Nobody. But we could get maybe $25 million to make 5 games at less than $5 million a piece. And she was like, oh, you suck. You're just like, I just have no interest in making games. I win awards and I make movies and I love films and games is just violence and it's this and that. I was like, games is a lot of things and it's going to be a lot more things and you don't really know. None of us can tell what it's going to be yet. But ride this with me for a second. This is what's going to happen. These systems are going to come in, it's going to change the medium, and you know what? The medium of games, they don't know how to do large productions yet. They don't know how to manage 150 people on a team, but we do. So we have that going for us.
Executives don't expect as much out of game devs as they do movie directors, which afforded him a lot of leniency. Some would probably be offended by the idea that games could be treated as though they were low-budget movies, but this approach allowed him to pioneer, while also cheating his homework off of the movies that he really liked. I'm not going to say that presentation isn't important, because it is important, but as far as getting your foot in the door, most people will just take what they can get. The people who end up pushing the frontier of technologies, in the beginning they were just industrious storytellers who wanted to have their story told by whatever means necessary.
Brought a whole nother level of depth of understanding to the environment.
Yeah.
You know, and which always inspired the work. And you asked, what's the creative process to the work? So the creative process for me really comes back to a problem to solve. If we can look at this world not in such a fearful way that everything I do every day isn't just driven to put food on the table and pay my mortgage, but is actually in the pursuit of something greater, some greater possibility. Then for me, that greater possibility was how do we unlock this crash course that we're on? And to me, that's eventually, I don't mean to sit here with philosophical positions and politics and stuff, but
I'll steer you back to the brain, don't worry.
okay.
Don't worry.
But to me, that was, we have all this tremendous inertia behind failing models. One would just be capitalism, right? So we'd say, how do we, I chose not to have kids, not because I didn't want kids, but because I didn't worry about the kids. I didn't want to worry about kids because I didn't think that we'd make it on the planet. And so we'd say, well, that's a problem. How might we solve that problem with whatever tools we as individuals have? And the only tool I felt like I had was really art, was visual arts. And so in the beginning, with visual arts, I was drawing and painting guys with axes and like the rest of them, and dragons and Lord of the Rings type of stuff. And it was really artists that unlocked my mind, when I started arriving in New York and getting around serious heavyweight intellectuals. They'd be like, well, that's really interesting, but where's the beef? What's behind this? What's your purpose? Why? Are you just masturbating and putting something up there because it's fun and you go, look what I could do, look at my talent? Or do you see problems with the world that you might use art to address in some way?
The people who end up pushing the frontier of technologies, in the beginning they were just industrious storytellers who wanted to have their story told by whatever means necessary. They're just trying to get their point across, the story, of course, being the ultimate point.
I'm not fond of the heavy emphasis on story in Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword, as I think it all too often breaks up the gameplay and gets in the way of the whole reason people play the games in the first place. The story never really should be the draw, just a little something to urge the player on.
Because when I talk at length about why the story in The Legend of Zelda is so important, I'm not talking out of my ass. This is the entire reason Eiji Aonuma became a developer. This is the entire reason most people become artists. It's the singular thing that they wanted to do. So yes, Zelda games exist as stories first, and games second, which, by the way, isn't a flaw, it's a strength.
All the references to the Hero of Time and all that stuff feel pretty forced. Its attempts to continue on from Ocarina of Time seem incredibly half-assed and not very well thought out. Then that's a pretty terrible fate in and of itself.
What Matt is really trying to say is that he believes that there's no way Aonuma could have possibly cared or kept track of all these things, but as I'm gonna show, Aonuma absolutely did keep track of the details. Speaking of details, let's look at another character who has his true identity revealed to him.
This section of the game is where the Zant stuff finally goes off the rails. He had only been seen rarely before this point, but he was shown to be a restrained and creepy villain who managed to be pretty intimidating. Had they kept this up, he could have easily substituted as Ganon for the game's main villain. Zant's character is flushed down the drain in the space of a minute, and it turns out he's just another boss to defeat on the path to the real villain, Ganon. I don't think there was any point to establishing Zant as a villain at all if he was going to be replaced at the end of the game with Ganondorf.
I'm not going to harp on it too much right now, but you should at the very least understand that all fictional characters are nothing more than metaphors, and they are, in fact, at the disposal of the larger story.
Freewheeling, aggressive pirate, strained and creepy villain who... It's as though Tetra was just a vessel to be overwritten. Zant's character is flushed down the drain.
This isn't a flaw, it's just how stories have been told for thousands of years. A fun, unique side character is never going to take precedent over the larger story. I'm going over many interview quotes later, of course, but you don't have to know the entire history of everything to understand that Eiji Aonuma is the originator for these story concepts. That much is self-evident if you simply read one or two interviews, because he's always the one that gives detailed and lengthy answers to story questions, talking about things he could only know if he was.
Tetra allows Link to get on board the pirate ship, and by this point you've probably figured out that she's Zelda. In Ocarina of Time they pulled this trick as well, but it was far more unexpected because Sheik was so different from how you would imagine Zelda to be, and because they hadn't had a twist like that before. Nobody who played Ocarina was about to be fooled twice. It's not a big deal, but it begs the question of why they even bothered, or why they didn't try to do something a bit different. This is a tough balance to maintain, however, and after the complaints from some people that Majora's Mask and The Wind Waker were too different, it was probably inevitable that Nintendo would eventually produce something too close to the Ocarina of Time mold. Back in the days of Ocarina and Majora, Nintendo clearly didn't care about crafting an overarching timeline for the Zelda series.
As I've been showing, at no point in these videos does Matt have any curiosity about the storytelling purposes of anything. He has a hunch that Tetra being Zelda wasn't thought out, but he never did any research, or he would find out that he was wrong. He also has a hunch that Tetra and Zant were originally meant to carry over into the third act of the story, replacing Zelda and Ganondorf, but he never did any research, or he would have found out he was wrong. And he keeps droning on about how Nintendo did this or Miyamoto did that. He's just making it abundantly clear that he has no insight on who actually came up with the story that he hates so much. The only way that anyone could miss important details like this, like Tetra obviously always being Zelda, or Zant obviously always being Ganondorf's heir, is by completely missing the intended reading of the text, which you can either do unintentionally, because you misunderstand the story at face value, or intentionally to mislead people even though you actually do understand the overarching story. Now, which one does Matt fit into? You might be shocked.
According to the story, the world was formed by 3 goddesses who are also responsible for creating the Triforce. This story has no bearing on the game in the slightest and could have been swapped out with any mystical backstory you could think of. We don't get any reason why the Triforce itself would exist, just that it was left behind after they were gone. These events are so far removed from the things that actually happen in the game that they might as well have not been included. I'm all for fleshing out the world, but this doesn't tell us anything about Hyrule or any of the people living in it that we didn't already know. It just confirms that some goddesses made the world, not a big deal.
Now, I could nerd about this, but then he skips over the part where Zelda recaps it later. And then when Ganon seizes the Sacred Realm, like they had been talking about the entire time, he says this.
The Ocarina of Time opens up the Temple of Time, where the game will skip forward 7 years into the future. There's a bit of an unnecessary cutscene where Ganon tells how this was his plan all along, blah blah blah, and then a bit more exposition.
Just as it was in Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, none of this stuff is optional to the story of Ocarina of Time. Matt wants to have his cake and eat it too, where he can ignore the story, because according to him it doesn't matter, but then when the story reaches a climax, and suddenly all of those things do gain relevance, suddenly it's this weird thing that comes out of nowhere. The truth is, it never came out of nowhere. Matt just wasn't paying attention. Like, check this one out.
But this is just one element of a much larger game, and regardless of how you feel about the visuals, it's worth considering how well The Wind Waker stands up as a Zelda game, and as a game in general. It starts out on the appropriately named Outset Island with
No, it doesn't start on Outset Island. I mean, you know full well that it doesn't. This intro explains all the supposed problems that Matt has with this story, and this is on the GameCube version, where you can't even skip the cutscenes, so you've had to deliberately edit that footage out of your recording. I can't believe people take this guy seriously when he thinks that he can make a 40-minute video claiming to have some kind of insight on The Legend of Zelda. Meanwhile, every single blasted thing he says about this story doesn't contain any information in it. Matt, not only are you missing the entire point of the whole story, you're doing it on purpose. You know what the story is. You've proven that you know.
We're told that Ganon has basically won. He's got his hands on the Triforce and took over the Sacred Realm. Link got sealed away for 7 years so he could grow old enough to take him on. From here on out, most of the game is played as adult Link in the future, and it's a great idea for the plot. In most action-adventure style games that revolve around saving the world, you're given some idyllic place that needs protection, or a post-apocalyptic world where the struggle of the people compels you to try and help them. Either of these scenarios can only be so effective because we're left wondering about what exactly it is we're trying to prevent, or what exactly it is we're trying to restore. As soon as you walk into Hyrule Town 7 years on, Ocarina of Time has answered both of these questions. You have an immediate comparison in your mind of what Hyrule should look like, and what it does look like now.
You have very good reading comprehension. Just because from Tetra's point of view all of this is mysterious, that doesn't mean the player doesn't know who Zelda is. Tetra wasn't alive 100 years ago. She obviously doesn't know who Zelda is. That doesn't mean that this moment is out of character. We, the audience, do know who Zelda is. Her name's on the title screen. The only reason you wouldn't apply this logic to the Wind Waker is if you were being deliberately disingenuous to serve your opinion.
You have an immediate comparison in your mind of what Hyrule should look like and what it does look like now. The game doesn't even take place in Hyrule, not as we know it anyway. What Hyrule should look like. The game doesn't even take place in Hyrule, not as we know it anyway. What Hyrule should look like and what it does look like now. Well, not as we know it anyway. And what it does look like now.
But as previously established, the moral at the end of The Wind Waker is that you should accept the past for what it is and build a better future. Twilight Princess, being an alternate ending to the story, is now inverting that moral. Now, Link is the one protecting his heritage and saving his family, and Ganondorf is the one creating a future for himself in spite of his past. The shoe's on the other foot, but interestingly, Ganondorf is still in the wrong. This is the thematic purpose behind the timeline. At this point, I really have no patience for the people who pretend like the timeline is inconsequential or confusing, because its purpose here is obvious. Twilight Princess is a poetic inversion of Wind Waker. That's the whole reason that they're both sequels to Ocarina of Time. Now you're able to explore, on an emotional level, both sides of the same coin. It's fun and interesting, and it's very sad that a lot of people just can't be bothered. But anyway, how does Eiji Aonuma pull all this off? Well, Zant is the key here. Notice that Zant doesn't have to beg Ganondorf for powers or anything. Ganondorf actually comes up to Zant. Let's think about this for 2 seconds. Why Zant? Well, Zant must be special, right? Remember how Tetra is the next Zelda after her mother? Well, here, Zant is the heir to the Lost Gerudo Patriarchy. He's the third male Gerudo after Groose. Once again, this stuff would be totally obvious if Matt simply read the text on screen. You know, thank God it's actually on screen this time. If this was really a retrospective, like it says in the title, wouldn't it contain information that Matthew would only have access to in retrospect? You know, like an art book that explains the story in black and white detail. But no, just to make sure he's been contrarian to every single point made by Hyrule Historia, since that's the true reason he made these videos, he's going to insist that Zant was always supposed to be the main villain of Twilight Princess. With no evidence, mind you. I mean, seriously? I mean, I'm not trying to be mean, but you don't have to make fun of these videos. They just make fun of themselves.
It may be a case they only made this decision because they knew many players would be replaying the game and thus would be ready for hard mode, but I hope they seriously consider this for the next Zelda. At the end of the game, you're taking on multiple Darknuts at once, who do several hearts of damage if they manage to connect.
There's a concerted effort by Matt to overgeneralize and downplay everything, not just the story. He's constantly acting like he's too good for the game. And if that's how you feel about video games, that they should have to earn your attention and respect, you know, that's a matter of personal taste. You can like whatever you want. But don't delude yourself into thinking that attitude makes you superior to everyone else. Now, like I said, most fans these days already know most of this. Matthew is a huge outlier. But at the end of the day, even the fans who are aware just aren't seeing the bigger picture. So we need to keep zooming out. And there's a huge prerequisite before you can truly appreciate Twilight Princess as the first proper revision to Zelda's chronology.
Oh man. Yeah, I think this is going to be a fun playthrough. Anyone here never see this? Also, thank you for the host, Mike. Hi, everybody. Oh, so there's a lot of people who have never played this game. I think you'll enjoy this. This is going to be one of those playthroughs I think you might remember for a little while. Not because of me, but because of the game. It's just one of those games. So, really nice look at the world. For anyone who's getting Legend of Zelda vibes, it's a pretty damn different game, aside from just a couple of visual similarities and sword. And horse, and bridge, and castle. And bow, and climbing. Oh, and Zelda is in this. And Link. And Epona. And Ganon. Alright, I'll stop.
Fumito Ueda is intentionally pulling from Eiji Aonuma in multiple important points in both Ico and in Shadow of the Colossus. And Eiji Aonuma is intentionally pulling from Fumito Ueda in multiple important parts in Twilight Princess, in Skyward Sword, and even as early as The Wind Waker. So, no, Vinny, their similarities are not superficial. Ico was essentially a love letter to Ocarina of Time, and Shadow of the Colossus has a load of distinctly intentional references to Majora's Mask. Aonuma's referencing Ueda as a reciprocation of Ueda's own references to him. This is about two artists coming to an emotional agreement about something. The comparison currently on screen alone proves that they were not only good friends and have a strong relationship, but that they were actively bouncing ideas off of one another and making notes in each other's margins. Comparing side by side like this isn't revealing something shallow like their favorite flavor of ice cream, it's corroborating evidence of their authority in their own work. The big one that I always think of is this one, the spiral staircase inside the tower. Aonuma wants you to think about Yorda from Ico, and he wants you to compare Yorda in that game to Zelda's role in this game. a pale, fragile girl hiding in the shadows. And that's exactly why Ganondorf's first phase is fighting Zelda as a puppet.
娘应给我一些，娘谁困着是속 희녀사시 이워콘사
이워두라이 르르도 레카킬로 이리옴
In Ico, Yuita was comparing the queen to Ganondorf, specifically from Ocarina of Time. The queen is Yorda's helicoptering mother, who won't let her daughter leave the house, and she's molding her daughter into becoming a younger version of herself. Yuita wants to show that love can be just as damaging as hate, if you're possessively loving and you don't let your children be their own people, or in Wander's case, if you try to cheat death by making a deal with the devil, he's also possessive with his love. Aonuma poetically agrees with these sentiments and has his parental figure in his game, The Wind Waker, be exclusively about that. Aonuma's talked about that several times, about how he made The Wind Waker for his son, and that Toon Link was meant to be an analog for his son. We're going to come back around to that later. These kinds of connections apply to the Twilight Princess too, but I'm talking about Wind Waker here because I think it's an easier and more obvious example, but really Twilight Princess is obvious too. Zelda fans are just incredibly dense. I mean, some of them have suggested, like, as a fan theory, maybe the Gerudo could have turned into the Twilight, but no, they haven't accepted that this is the intended interpretation. They haven't accepted that this is a fact. I mean, I know it's not everyone, but a lot of people, including Vinesauce, or Vinny, he's watching the pre-Lakebed Temple flashback and assumes that these interlopers are some new race of people that we've never heard of. I'm not joking, he actually takes the explanation for the series' largest retcon at face value.
I don't remember any of that stuff. Okay.
By extending the
I don't remember any of this.
They don't get that Midna's hair color is meant to be reflective of Twinrova. They don't get that Midna's dialogue before the fight reflects what Naboru tells you as a child. And they especially don't understand that Zant being a male Gerudo and wanting to reestablish the patriarchy is what all of this dialogue was always about. There is a pretty good video by Max Darrett where he talks about all the Gerudo's dark magic stuff, and how in both Zelda and in Ico, there's a focus of this dark transformation magic and body horror. But again, most of that is the bleeding edge of the fandom, and even he doesn't get into everything. But it bears repeating that none of this is a fan theory, and it's not inconsequential. It's the way that the director of both Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess intended the audience to interpret their connected story, also known as canon. It's a fact. It is not a mystery. It's not even hidden. It's required for understanding the story properly. It's ridiculous that I should even need to say that, because these games, in full reality, they're not even that dense with story. These stories are moral lessons meant for children. If you just pay basic attention, this is the only way that you could interpret it. The game is practically preaching it at you. The characters explicitly tell you all this shit in dialogue. Now, unfortunately for Yuita, most of his games, the cutscenes are written as silent movies, so you don't need dialogue to be able to follow the story. But Onuma's games require dialogue because of his background. We are getting to that later, like I said. Don't worry, we're almost there. But you can tell, like, even down to a plot level, all these connections are important. Like, how Ganon is taking girls to the Forsaken Fortress because they have yellow hair. That's just like how Ico is taken to the Queen's Castle because he's a boy with horns. Yuita is deliberately putting you in the shoes of outcasts from cultural stigmas in his games. And, you know, those ideas of sacrifice to ward off evil are pretty essential to Shintoism. And any media-literate adult should know that Shintoism isn't important to anything created in Japan. As you can see, Ico's connections to Zelda and Zelda's connections to Ico are not optional pieces of this analysis. Even in Vinny's case, I actually don't think he meant to say that Ico and Zelda aren't connected. What he really meant was just for chat to not watch the gameplay expecting Zelda, which is a good primer.
For anyone who's getting Legend of Zelda vibes, it's a pretty damn different game, aside from just a couple of visual similarities.
But as Vinny's watching Shadow of the Colossus' intro, you can hear the moment where he recognizes the Bridge of Elden quote.
And sword. and horse and bridge and castle.
I don't know how you missed the Lostwood stuff from like 5 seconds ago, but that's not the point. It's very obvious in his tone. He just immediately ate his own words. But rather than apologize and admit there's something he could learn here, he just turned it into a joke instead.
Oh, and Zelda is in this. And Link. And Epona. And Ganon. Alright, I'll stop.
This was an opportunity, a moment where Vinny could have educated his audience on something he picked up on. Seriously. Shouldn't it matter that Vinny plays video games for a living? Like, if someone's gonna call this stuff out, shouldn't, of all people, that responsibility fall on someone like him? It's not like it's that hard to figure out. This doesn't just apply to Vinny. If you play Nintendo games for a living, and you didn't know that Zelda takes cues from the Ico series, I'm not gonna say that that's okay, because I don't think it's okay. These ideas don't come from nowhere, and they're not meant to seem like they do. The only reason Nintendo fans don't know any of this stuff is because all their gaming experience exists in a bubble.
I feel like right now in the early days of Switch, that's what you're seeing, is that there's people who have the Switch and are hungry for
but
games
how many?
to play.
Well, how big is it?
The
How big
audience?
is the audience?
Exactly.
What is it? 2 million units?
2 million.
yeah,
is
right,
what
'cause that's what they wanted
the
to hit
original
by.
launch
Yeah,
would have
yeah.
been.
So let's take 2 million units.
Yeah.
Right now, do you ever sell in 10% of the installed base?
Supposedly, Switch has a crazy attach rate with the
Well,
with
that's because
Zelda
there's
and then-
so few available. One of the
Yeah.
highest IPs of all time, right? Nintendo first party will deliver IPs that the Nintendo audience is just frothing for, right? So they'll have the highest attach rate of any new console
Yeah.
with their own specific IPs, Zelda and Mario. No, really, who really by the end of the life of the Wii, who else was making money on the Wii aside from Nintendo? How many titles sold for the Wii that weren't Nintendo first party?
Sure.
Okay. So what happened? So they started basically evaporating third-party support, right? Then we get to Wii U. What happened? Same.
No third parties, yeah.
So there could be some advantages for some people, but overall it's going to add up to the same thing. Smaller portfolio on the library, period. At the end of the day, the catalog is going to be this when it could have been this. You would have thought that maybe if there's no games for sale on a network, if people have a hardware device, maybe they'd like to know that a game has become available.
Yeah.
So I was thinking that, in a silly me.
Yeah.
If you grew up with Nintendo, there's a good chance you never leave Nintendo, and more crucially, there's a good chance you never actually grow up. Instead of complaining that Skyward Sword was boring, what people at the time should have said is how bold it actually is. And no, I'm not saying that out of any bias whatsoever. This is one of the key things that holds video games back from being appreciated as narrative art, because all the art intellectuals think that video games are nothing more than toys, and all the gamers are apparently only interested in the toy-like qualities of the games they play. Credit where credit is due, when Vinny streams a Zelda game, he does play it correctly, slowing down and making sure to read all the NPC dialogue like signposts.
Like a Twilight Princess. Shit, hang on.
So despite being a viewer of channels like AVGN, Narrow, or Matthew Matosis, Vinny's been immune to all the big common misconceptions, which makes him an excellent example for this section.
It goes like this. All right, there's 3 separate timelines that branch off of Ocarina of Time. So, here's how it goes. I want to explain because it's very interesting. I just learned some more little details in Hyrule Historia. So, 3 different timelines. In one of the timelines, when Ocarina ends, Link goes back to being a child. That's the ending that we see. Zelda tells the king, they find out that, Ganondorf was a cunt, and they decide to get rid of him. Many years down the road, they execute him. That's in Twilight Princess. But here's what happened to Link. Link wandered off into the forest without a fairy. And, Navi didn't get lost. Navi flies away. At the end of Ocarina of Time, Navi just flies away. And in the beginning of Majora, you see that Link is looking for a friend. And he's obviously in the woods. And it's highly speculated that say if Majora did happen, let's just say it did, if it was real, if there really was a parallel universe that Link went to and returned from, well, that Link was forever forgotten. No one knew about the Hero of Time. No one celebrated the Hero of Time in this particular timeline. Just to further add to that, in Hyrule Historia, it's directly stated that the Link, the Hero of Time, was never to be seen or heard from again after Majora's Mask. And his regret over that, as it states in Hyrule Historia, allowed him to be the swordsman whose sole purpose was to teach the new Link of Twilight Princess the moves that he knew as a way to pass down his thing, his legacy. So the hero is successful, and the adult era, Ganondorf is revived, Hyrule is sealed and flooded. Because the hero wasn't even around, I don't think. I have to read into that a little bit more. I haven't gotten to the Wind Waker section yet. I know it's a little bit to wrap your head around, but it is exceedingly interesting. So, isn't this stuff really interesting? Like, I love this stuff, the theories. And it seems like Majora was the deepest and had the most psychological stuff going on there. So, and there you go. Tingle is a representation of Link. Tingle is a mutation of Link. Because he's a 40-year-old man dressed as a fairy. Which again is representative of the...
When I watched this in 2015, I was enthralled. I had a lot of fun revisiting Zelda with Vinny's Wii U streams, and then playing them on my own. At the age of 14, I hadn't played Skyward Sword yet, and I hadn't read Hyrule Historia, but I did watch Vinesauce, and that was my introduction to all this. I'm gonna criticize a popular streamer, but know that I do so with peace and love. I really don't think that Vinny is stupid, although he can be impatient sometimes. You can see here that when he applies himself, he's actually an enormous asset to media literacy. I'm also not the first person to ever complain about his reactionary approach to really just any game outside of Zelda that tries to be story-driven. It's not irrelevant either. There's a large example that I'm going to get into soon, but first, I just want to fully concede something. Yes, this is about loyalty and authority, and I'm going to address that directly before I talk about said example. Just because fiction isn't real, that doesn't mean that it's a lie or that it doesn't mean anything. In the end, art is what you make it out to be. If you're not receptive to it, you won't understand. If you laugh at it like it's a joke, then that's all you're allowing it to be for you. That's your choice. So to understand something from the perspective of the person who created it, you do have to drink the Kool-Aid. At least a little bit. But I think this is such a sticking point for a lot of gamers, not just Vinny. They've latched on to this false idea of player autonomy and quote-unquote freedom. That feeling you get when you're perfectly immersed in an artist's world, it's not freedom, it's surrender. There's only one correct way to play a video game, and when you do, you feel free. You feel like your actions are your own. And that feeling is, in fact, important. The player has to have control over certain small actions. It's something unique to the medium of games. Only in a game are you able to fully and completely immerse the audience in the role of your protagonist. But that really isn't a goal in and of itself, it's just a means to an end. Video games are curated experiences. At no point is the player in control of what context their small actions can be applied, because if you do something unintended, we understand that to be a glitch and not part of the design. Instead, the artist is in control of the context, which is why level design is crucial. It dictates the entire grammar of how games talk to you. There's just no such thing as a linear game. Terms like gameplay first and open world are not genres. They're marketing buzzwords, and they always have been. If you're somebody who truly enjoys open world level design, I have to stress that you aren't being entertained by an artist's imagination. You're just caught up in your own. Gamers today have this assumption that storytelling is somehow foreign or isolated from gameplay. It's an assumption you can't square with reality, though. If you actually read the interviews of Eiji Aonuma, Lorne Lanning, Hideo Kojima, you learn that they were all involved in their games intimately and as a whole. There's no notion that gameplay and story are separated in their development process in any way. And more than that, it should be commonly understood that when you're an artist, you have an idea, and you design around that idea. All of your designs are influenced by your idea. Most of the effort on the part of the artist is to continually bring their designs back to their core idea. It's not really as strange or as convoluted as it's made out to be. It's just standard practice. The standards weren't always this way, of course, but for the game developers that I keep mentioning, they all got their start in game development in the PS2 era, after games went 3D, and was the moment that video games finally stopped being only for nerds. If you want to know exactly why games weren't seen as much before the 90s, Lorne Lanning was there. He can tell you why.
What was also on the horizon was Sony PlayStation. So Sony was saying, we're going to get into the game business. And that was kind of out there a couple years before the PlayStation launch, at least. And that's when I thought, this is really going to get interesting, because for the first time, we're going to have a real, true entertainment company get into the game business as a player, and not just a toy company. And that's how I saw Sega and Nintendo, was toy companies. And I don't mean that in any derogatory or condescending way. I just meant they saw their market, and they didn't believe in things like sequels. Check this out, right? So we're going around and talking to game publishers and stuff, and I'm trying to tell them how we're going to build a series, and we're going to, because I'm just following, like, what does X-Files do? What did Disney do? What did the sequels? This is all Hollywood's about. In games, they were thinking, and this is in 1993, 94, 95, they're going, there's no money in sequels. The sequel only sells at best half as much as the original hit, so we don't really bank on it. And I saw that, I was like, there's one of our moments. There's one of my George Lucas, Walt Disney moments. They don't believe in sequels, which means they don't believe in brand, which means they still thinking about it like it's the toy industry. You know, you come out with Cabbage Patch Kid, but you can't milk it to death, right? Barbie lasts forever, Hot Wheels last forever, Legos lasted forever, but everything else tends to be largely come and go. So the toy industry thought more in this way of, you come up with a toy, if it can be a hit, you ride it, you milk that cow for all it's worth, and then you got to come up with a new one. And games was still thinking that way.
It's like I said earlier, this is the entire reason that people like this became artists and became developers. It was always what was most important to them and what they wanted to do with their lives. In all of these cases, the consistent problem isn't that they made the game too cutscene heavy or they were trying to balance everything to the satisfaction of the audience. The problem that they were actually faced with is that they couldn't tie their designs back to their ideas in the way that they wanted to, either because the hardware wouldn't support the actions or scenarios that they wanted, or because corporate overseer didn't want them to do it for an entirely arbitrary reason. As time goes on, the artist has more respect, the industry standards improves, and technology progresses to the point where they can finally execute their vision. From what the artists have been able to accomplish with their later work, you can just immediately understand that games like Abe's Odyssey, Ico, and the first Metal Gear are all extremely unfinished games, and their sequels don't fare any better. So even though we can go back now and point to these early titles as early signs of a particular artist, the studio really had more control than they did. The only thing salvageable about the game is that it partially belonged to the game's director. But even though the game has those elements, these games really don't accurately reflect the artists that truly made them. As a direct result, the audience who gained an attachment and became fans of their earliest work, when they couldn't do what they wanted, almost always developed mistaken impressions.
This one is a sequel to Ocarina of Time, but wait, not a sequel to the end where adult Link defeats Ganon, no, it's a sequel to young Link after he got sent back. So now, any speculation of Nintendo ever making a sequel to Zelda 2 is deader than shit.
This clip of James Rolfe is a perfect example. James wants a direct sequel to Zelda 3. He wants a story that continues in one direction. That was never going to happen, though, because before Ocarina of Time, the story of Zelda that was being told was nowhere near deep enough to actually support a continuing story. Each Zelda title basically existed in replacement of one another. They were explicitly not 3 chapters in one story, and they weren't trying to be. During development, Tezuka and Koizumi in their earliest work together kept trying to run away from continuity, not embrace it. That's not because they didn't want to tell stories, it's because they didn't want to get attached and deal with the inevitable loss when they were told no to their ideas.
They don't understand yet. It's going to be brand IP and sequels. But that means it's got to be deeper, richer universes. And in the shit you're currently delivering, I understand why you don't believe in sequels. Because that story sucked. No one gives a fuck about your story because it sucks. If it wasn't good play, your character sucks because you don't have any character development. And so I was very critical of what the characters were in games. Not that I wasn't enjoying them, but when you put it up to a Hollywood standard of character development, character arc, what's happening across the multi-act structure, you had a whole different analysis of what constituted a popular character. So does Mario turn into a good movie? It's a fucking terrible movie, right? It's a terrible movie because it's not there to begin with, right? Does Ratchet and Clank make a good movie? I love Insomniac. Why would you make a movie out of Ratchet and Clank? How deep is the fabric of those characters? How many other game movies did we just give no depth that we expect from movies? So they brought to the movie the same superficiality that's in the game, except what they had the game going for it was good challenge. Now it's just a challenge to watch, right? So for me, I was like, if we build really rich characters with really rich, deep stories that aren't what you expect, so they have the ability to possibly cut through, then they might have a longer life. And as the game industry matures, then maybe they can hit the big time. Then maybe they can, really have their name in lights.
What James really wants when he says that he wants a sequel to Zelda 2 is for things to go back to the way they were. He wants a sequel that doesn't try to tell an actual story. Whenever you're having a discussion about the particular merits about something with an NES fan or a Super Nintendo fan, you'll always notice how impenetrably vague they are with what they choose to focus on. This assumption that the mass exodus of the NES-era developers were just a bunch of happenstance is itself an example of survivorship bias. The retro gamers who were there at the time, of course, are provincial when they talk about the jump to 3D, as if this was a significant technological change to the point where 2D and 3D games are entirely different types of games. The reality is, their reactions don't hinge on whether or not these things were always there, or if they were consequentially important. What these types of audiences aren't willing to admit is that they're automatically hostile to the mere concept of there being an overarching story in the first place.
I'm glad that Zelda, Ganon and Hyrule are all absent from Majora's Mask, because after Ocarina of Time, there was no need to revisit Hyrule and no story to be told there. Any direct sequel would need to be told somewhere else in order not to weaken the impact of the events in Ocarina.
That's obviously not true. So what's really going on? It turns out, when you refuse to let artists tell their own stories, and you remove the slight technological edge that you had, suddenly your intellectual property doesn't have a leg to stand on. But it could have been easily avoided if people from the 80s era of games had a reason to be interested in those series other than pure mechanical satisfaction.
There are plenty of famous actors and directors who've lent their names to movie-like games, but Oddworld's co-founders Sherry McKenna and Lorne Lanning are from a world of special effects and theme park rides. They left behind big budgets and state-of-the-art equipment because they never had full control of a project.
When you are the vendor, the client thinks that they know more than you do about what you're basically doing. So you'll have the suits come down and say, yeah, that looks great. Can you make it blue? And so basically, my whole career has been spent listening to other folks tell me how to do what I'm supposed to be an expert at doing.
Lorne Lanning is an exception in the scenario, not in the fact that he's dealing with these problems, but in the fact that he's allowed to talk about them. Eiji Aonuma and Hideo Kojima would have had to keep their mouths shut, or it would have cost them their jobs.
most of the development community, not the game buyers, but the development community said 3D is what's going to make better gameplay. Well, they're wrong. You know, and game players today know that they're wrong because they've got 100 games on a shelf that aren't as good as many of the games they used to play in 2D. 3D is not that important right now. Eventually we'll go 3D, but right now what's important is making better gameplay, and that's where so many people have missed it entirely.
The authority of an artist's influence on a work is considered a threat to the authority of a corporation whose only goal is
Someone sent in that one about too many Chinese cooks spoil the broth.
What? Well, why is? Well, that's. I don't know who slipped the word Chinese in there, but I heard it as too many cooks.
Well, it was just all sort of Chinese proverbs and that.
One of my favourite on the same subject is a camel is a horse designed by committee. And if you wanted to design a horse and you had that vision, but you let 12 people in the room have their say, it wouldn't come out as you wanted it to do, and it wouldn't be as good. A vision is more perfect than committee, because everyone having their say, it becomes anodyne, it becomes compromised. Whereas the best things you can do is have an idea and have a vision and auteur that.
Rick, can I just say now, I can tell from his look that he's thinking, which committee designed the camel?
Well,
This is going to be difficult to understand without context, but I want to argue that Vinny does not have a distaste for Death Stranding 2. Because first of all, he says as much in Part 3.
Glad you're still enjoying playing this. Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. Once again, you may post your kappas, but I'm not going to guarantee I'm going to come back to this. Just because that makes it a little easier for me to make decisions. I just don't want to get people's hopes up that, like, oh, Vinny's definitely going to play more of this. Maybe. I'm enjoying it, clearly. I haven't been able to put it down the past 3 hours, but I don't know with all the other stuff I'm streaming if this is something I want to stream. And again, even if I am enjoying it, I also don't know how entertaining this is for, like, everyone that watches the streams. So, you know, I try to make decisions based on a couple different things. And this is also a long, like, large open world game. After me playing a large, long open world game. Large. Yeah. Oblivion. So, but it definitely, yes, it sunk its teeth in. And the hooks are in. The game is cool. I appreciate some of the stuff it's doing, and I'm having fun with it. I'm not going to say this is a 10 out of 10 necessarily. There's stuff that gets me a little bored, and of course, not having played the first one, I'm at a bit of a disadvantage. But I mean, again, you just saw me stream like 3.5 hours of it, 3 hours, whatever it was, and I just had a really good time. So, cool game, even if some of it, I'm like, what is happening? Even if most of it, I'm like, what is happening?
I think it's normal to try new things, and Vinny obviously doesn't have a legal obligation to do a complete playthrough of every game he does. Of course, it would be nice. I think that if I was in Vinny's position, I'd feel lucky to be able to play video games for a living. The thing is, though, it's his life, and I don't have a license over someone just because I watch them a lot. But I'm not the only person who noticed that this contradicts his behavior. I want to argue this has nothing to do with how Vinny is perceiving the quality of Death Stranding 2.
It's like when I play this game and this happens, I know that again, I'm playing it wrong because I'm not like, you know, I'm making fun of it a little bit. But listen, it is cool. I mean, I'm glad Kojima can do stuff like this. I think Kojima needs someone to hold him back. If Kojima was able to do everything he wanted all the time, the MGS series would not be nearly as liked. I've heard that opinion a lot, and I like Kojima a lot. I really do, and I love his games, most of them. And there are some earlier games of his I would like to check out. But I actually think that is an interesting, and I agree with that sentiment about yeah, limitation helps, and people saying no or being honest and giving you a little bit of pushback can lead to better product. I mean, I'm glad Kojima can do stuff like this. Like, I'm happy for him. I think Kojima needs someone to hold him back, and I agree with that sentiment. I'm glad Kojima can do stuff like this. I think Kojima needs someone to hold him back. Like, I'm happy for him. I think Kojima needs someone to hold him back, and I agree with that sentiment. Like, I've seen people, like, really, like kind of, they become his, like, personal bodyguards. I think he can handle himself. I think he's a big boy, Kojima. I think Kojima needs someone to hold him back. I think he can handle himself. I think Kojima needs someone to hold him back.
For emphasis, I want to argue this has nothing to do with how Vinny is perceiving the quality of Death Stranding 2. Instead, Vinny is using criticism to shield himself emotionally. Which again is probably difficult to understand without context. You wouldn't be able to play Armchair Psychologist without watching an unhealthy amount of Vinesauce.
Do you have any advice for an unemployed person struggling? OnlyFans? No, I don't have any. If you want a real answer, I was trying to think of a real answer, and that's the only one that came to mind. I would say don't lose hope. As much as possible, try not to. But I don't know what the job market is like in 2025 compared to 2007 when I was out of college. But I applied to fucking everything. And eventually, oh, finally some light armor that doesn't look like... I've explained this story a bunch. But yeah, I didn't expect streaming to become anything. There is no money in streaming. Streaming was nothing. It was just like a hobby. So, you know, if you hang in there, I didn't know what I wanted to do, genuinely. We talked about the potential for teaching. Even that, I don't think I would have been good at that. Could have gotten a job tightening up the graphics on level 3. I mean, I did want to work in games somehow. It just seemed unattainable, and I didn't know... I didn't know what I could do, because I'm not, like... As you've learned, I'm the ideas guy. I don't know if they have, like, degrees for ideas guys. You do as a voice actor. But even so, you know what? All of that stuff seemed unattainable, and I didn't have the drive. So, what I wanted to do was just find a job to make money, and then drink on the weekends, as all would do that did such things at the time. And, I get it. I mean, that's what life was for a while for me.
People that rise in careers in industries, but that came from very, very, very humble beginnings, they tend to have a sort of like a lot of scar tissue, you know, because they've fought against the world to get where they were, or at least to get above the tipping point, you know, because no one believed in them, and no one, you know, there's so many people that no one believed in, so they had to believe in themselves, and then they developed much more defensive attitudes.
And it didn't incorporate my degree in any meaningful way, so I just kept doing whatever I could find for a while just to save money and to pay bills. Oh, right, okay. But then I was lucky because I was applying for jobs at one point. I got nothing. It was 2008, 2009 when the economy stuff happened, the collapse and all that Wall Street fun stuff, the funness, the fun money stuff, the wacky money stuff.
People ceased to travel and stopped meeting in person. They grew distant from one another and became further isolated. The social, cultural, and political bonds between humans began to crumble.
No, Chad, that's not a metaphor. I applied at the public access TV station, and I heard back months later, and I got it. So, just apply to everything, and just get addicted to applying to shit. Picture yourself in a field, in a cellophane moat, plasticine porters. Oh, there's a lever there. But yeah, I mean, just apply to everything. And then I will say from public access, I learned how to edit. I learned how to, film. I got the bug to make videos, and then that turned into YouTube. And then me dropping pudding on a piece of paper. And nothing in between, and here I am now. I'd recommend finishing it off with visiting Apple Watch. We'll have to do that next time. All right. It's bingo time.
There's so many people that no one believed in, so they had to believe in themselves, and then they developed much more defensive attitudes. And this was a handicap of mine earlier, is that although I was going for the world, I had no idea how sort of defensive and protective my attitudes were around my ideas or my craft. And that took a long time to figure out that many times the biggest obstacle is you.
Yeah.
And the limitations you're setting on yourself, you're setting them your own, and you're convinced that the rest of the world has frameworked you this way.
All right. Let's see if I got any bingo. I'm going to need your help on this one, chat, so please let me know. Okay, so, I don't think I got this one. Squeeze It made this. Viney Sauce Vinny bingo. Prematurely rage quits game. Doesn't happen too often. Calls out someone in chat. This is like every potential spectrum of what I could say as a person. So let me call out you. So you can get I2. Let's get I2 going. And I'll say, let me hear about your stuff. What things do you say often? This didn't happen. The appropriate text and conversation probably didn't happen. That didn't happen. That didn't happen. That didn't happen. I don't think this happened either. That certainly happened. Or are you like R9K mode all the time? I wonder. Oh, I won. Sorry. Oh yeah. Fuck. Cool. Bab. Star Trek was good, but it wasn't Blade Runner. Not much happened. That probably happened. Ironic, oblivious statement. Yep, that definitely happened. That kind of more or less happened. The scratch noises happened for sure. Feel free to play bingo, but I do say a lot of the same shit over and over again. I do, but I stream for 25, 30 hours a week. You know what I mean? And I tend to talk about the things I like. I'm a program. I have my programming. It's a weird thing to see, but I think it's I think it would be natural for most people. I don't know. So no bingo here. Vinny, not much happened. You were the best part of the stream. That's a shame. Blade Runner. All right. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed Scrum plus bingo. Feel free to play bingo, but I do say a lot of the same shit over and over again. I do, but I stream for 25, 30 hours a week. You know what I mean? And I tend to talk about the things I like. I'm a program. I have my programming. It's a weird thing to see, but I think it's I think it would be natural for most people. I don't know.
Vinny is using criticism to shield himself emotionally. Which again is probably difficult to understand without context. You wouldn't be able to play Armchair Psychologist without watching an unhealthy amount of Vinesauce. This is rather pertinent when you consider the story of Death Stranding 2. No, not the plot, the story. It's about the existential aspects of being a father, bringing another life into the world.
And you, of all people, must know that humanity can never truly escape extinction.
My cousin used to scare me when I was younger. He said the sun was going to burn out. I was like, no. No. He's like, yeah, no, it's going to happen. There's nothing we could do about it. I'm like, no. And it's like, you know, what am I going to do? Like, go to my parents and be like, you told me the sun's going to burn out. And what are they going to do? Lie to me? Like, it is. Just got to play some video games, you know? I would get upset. I would get like... I was a weird kid because I would get like existential dread early. I saw the movie Independence Day and I got like depressed and anxious for like months because I thought, well, this is just going to happen and there's nothing we can do about it. Thank you for entertaining me on my boring Saturday nights. These hot messes keep me going. Well, they're fun. I don't always want to go out. You know, like I used to go out on the weekends more and... there's just nothing to do. I'm not really a big drinker anymore, so it's like, well, what do you do? I'd rather stream. How long until next Chrono Trigger playthrough? When's the next election? Apparently, I play it every 4 years now. It's true, though. It's weird. I've been playing it, like, pretty much exactly... maybe just to escape from the bad and just enjoy. You know what I mean? Just to, like... feel some, I don't know, some semblance of normalcy. Because, I mean, even if, whatever side of the fence you're on, it becomes a fucking circus, and it just becomes exhausting and negative and horrible. So, you know, enemies become friends, friends become enemies, and all that. You know what I mean, Brian?
Vinny is using criticism to shield himself emotionally. If you still don't believe me, I have a really bad example. It won't help at all. Vinny's pretty infamous for toilet humor. It's either so unfunny that it's funny again, or we're all just juvenile. I don't know if there's a difference.
God, these medals are fucking huge. Huge, bro, huge. Cock is huge. I am now aware that there are probably many chat members that are unaware of the cock is huge meme. And I'd like to say that it's very funny. It's very funny.
Either way, I'm totally guilty of laughing at this. But what stands out to me is that there's actually toilet humor in Death Stranding 2. I would never believe if someone told me that Vinny missed a pee-pee joke. But, well...
They be laughing?
And you know, when I saw this, it kept me awake at night, thinking that Vinny might never understand Kojima's poetic genius here of a baby laughing when you pee. So I really had to include this in the video. But seriously, it's like this with everything. He just doesn't let himself absorb, anything that happens in this game. He has to react to it as soon as it happens. And then he actually reads chat. I mean, this is Vinny Vinesauce, the guy who won't even read donation messages, but he's looking over his shoulder for someone to disagree with his video game opinions? Like, what? Then you notice something interesting. When Vinny's not trying to convince everyone that he doesn't understand the story, he's busy talking about his legacy and whether or not people take him seriously. This is rather pertinent when you consider the story of Death Stranding 2. No, not the plot, the story. It's about the existential aspects of being a father, bringing another life into the world.
You should explain all your classic bits, from play DMC2 to why no shoot the club cousin. Surely my life has been fulfilling. As a non-professional gamer, I'm gonna go ahead and say this level might be slightly outside of my my skill zone. You are literally a professional gamer. By whose metric? I go bing bing wahoo. You are the definition of a professional gamer. Well, we need another word for it then. I'm not a skillful professional gamer. Look, I'm in the trash. Vinny, I just watched a clip of you doing a Taz slide in Mario 64. Chad hates me tonight, huh?
Let me just say this. Yum.
After 10 years, this is my legacy, isn't it? What are these references? I don't even remember half of this shit. I'm kind of in a weird position in my life where most of my life is very, very, very normal. And then I go to a convention and it's just bonkers. But people were, you know, talking to me about, like, really, really obscure moments. Like, Vinny, in the corruption stockpile, where you made the character do this, and then Donkey Kong did this, and then Mario did this. How'd you do that? And what was going through your mind when you saw that? Usually, I just don't remember. And though, like, people now ask about the music a little bit more too, and they're like, Vinny, what was the recording like of this thing? And I'm like, I don't remember. Sometimes I do a little bit, and sometimes I don't. All right. I cannot do this slide without a lot of time and patience, and I don't know if I have those. I'm sorry, chat. I'm just not a good gamer. I'm a professional. Thank you. It is a little difficult, actually, I say, as a pro gamer. Chad admitted one time I was a pro gamer. They said it. They're like, well, you do play video games for a living, right? So you're a pro gamer. I'm like, thank you, Chad. That's very nice of you. That's the best compliment I've ever received. I'm a professional pro gamer. Nobody said that. Not only did people say that, but I have it in my memory. I can't believe he's still thinking about that moment. Yeah, that's the only way I can get to sleep at night, is if I remember the moment that the chat member called me a pro gamer. You're a situationally pro gamer. Even that I'll take, so that's a nice thing to hear. Wait until you see the compilation of Vinny being a god gamer. That's gonna be a fun compilation. 2-minute compilation. Hey!
And that took a long time to figure out that many times the biggest obstacle is you.
Yeah.
And the limitations you're setting on yourself, you're setting them your own, and you're convinced that the rest of the world has frameworked you this way.
Yeah, that's the only way I can get to sleep at night, is if I remember the moment that the chat member called me a pro gamer. You should explain all your classic bits, from play DMC2 to why no shoot the club cousin. Surely my life has been fulfilling.
Oh boy, that must hurt.
A little bit, man. Vinny would make a terrible post-apocalyptic father. Well, I mean, you could just get rid of post-apocalyptic from that sentence.
This is rather pertinent when you consider the story of Death Stranding, too. It's about the existential aspects of being a father, bringing another life into the world. Vinny is using criticism to shield himself emotionally. You could say, from a certain point of view, the closest thing Vinny has to children of his own is chat, his audience. This goes back to Zelda, of course, and to Eiji Aonuma. As we're going to learn, passing on what you've learned to your kids is going to be a big talking point when discussing the intended interpretation of The Legend of Zelda. But more than that, it should be a little obvious that these things matter. Life, happiness, love. These are the things that truly matter. And, for some reason, gamers like Vinny think that it's strange for an artist to care about these things more than the entertainment quality of a game. When gamers fail to recognize story, it's not actually because they're too stupid to understand it. It's all too easy to accuse them of being stupid. But I know Vinny. I know he's not stupid. And as we saw before, Matthew Matosis wasn't as stupid as he let on either. Humans tell each other stories as invaluable life lessons, and they're always framed in a way where you can understand them and interpret them for how the story may apply to your own life.
Oh. Search for Lou. Oh wait, is baby... But baby is dead. Oh, maybe he's just not okay. To be fair, I don't think I would be either, so that's okay. I'll give him a pass. I still don't understand why the child is, like, dead alive. Which, it's fine. I don't need to know. I'm just saying. It's fine. Whatever.
Okay, kiddo. Let's go.
Is it alive? But the stuff that was being presented to me, I was just like, okay, Kojima's being weird for the sake of being weird. Got it. Oh. Search for Lou. Oh wait, is baby... But baby is dead. Oh, maybe he's just not okay.
Okay, kiddo. Let's go.
Is it alive? Oh, maybe he's just not okay. The low frame rate is cool. It's just fucking hilarious.
Sam, that pod is empty. Oh. You know, no one should have to suffer such loss.
Oh wait, is baby... But baby is dead. Oh, maybe he's just not okay. I still don't understand why the child is, like, dead alive. Oh, maybe he's just not okay.
Gamers are capable of doing this. Again, we are not stupid people, but they just don't want to admit it to themselves. They don't want to confront their emotions through fiction, which, speaks volumes for how incapable they must be of confronting them in general or practical contexts. Because fiction is supposed to be a safe space. It's not like Death Stranding is literally about Vinny and chat. It's just about a man and his son. Vinny was able to follow this. He's not stupid. He just continually and audibly repressed and suppressed that information. Vinny's unique in this scenario, not in the fact that these things make him uncomfortable, but instead he's unique because we can actually see him create these problems for himself live in real time. Matthew Matosis wasn't that stupid, we saw that, but he had enough time to script out a video quote-unquote critiquing the game, which in reality was just mental gymnastics to ignore the fact that he couldn't face the music and look inside of himself. This is what all fiction is about. Books, movies, games. Games doing this isn't strange, or at the very least it shouldn't be strange if we want to live in a world where artists are allowed to create art. This is why all humans across time have told each other stories.
It's time for you to hit the road and start a new journey.
Wow, episode 2 is short.
Super convenient. Gotta get that hay bale. That's the whole... But good chapter.
And as long as gamers remain dependent on toys that help keep them emotionally incapable, and as long as they throw tantrums every time a game asks them to be an adult, we're just not gonna get anywhere. The first step to fixing a problem is accepting that you have one in the first place. And I really don't know if Vinny will actually metabolize this as his own failing, and not the game's. In the end, not only is the Zelda timeline not a fan theory, not retroactive, and not only is the story not inconsequential, isolated, or foreign, it is genuinely everything. And that's the only proper way to understand the real world, is by accepting that when someone has an idea they're putting forth, you're either there to accept it or reject it entirely. By only metabolizing a fraction of what's being put in front of you, what gamers have to realize, if they're actually going to make an impact beyond their own pleasure, is that it's actually worse to only metabolize a fraction of it than if you would have never engaged with it whatsoever.
It was really artists that unlocked my mind, when I started arriving in New York and getting around serious heavyweight intellectuals. They'd be like, well, that's really interesting, but where's the beef? What's behind this? What's your purpose? Why? Are you just masturbating and putting something up there because it's fun and you go, look what I could do, look at my talent? Or do you see problems with the world that you might use art to address in some way?
The Legend of Zelda games that Eiji Aonuma directed aren't the pinnacle of game design. The only reason that we haven't done better than that is because we refuse to hold ourselves accountable to the standards that they put in place, and not because they're great games, even though they absolutely are. The rest of this video will be a small biography of Eiji Aonuma, and an explanation of which story elements were important to him personally and why. Aonuma himself has a little bit of time before he even enters the picture, but I wanted to start really early on so that you can get a scope of how things changed once he did enter the picture, and an explanation of why those changes were necessary in order for Zelda to become a meaningful work of art. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom won't be directly discussed until Section 4, but I think you'll be surprised at how many positive things I do have to say about them when we get there. These early Zelda games are going to be a footnote in this video, because obviously our subject is only tangentially involved in it. That doesn't mean that these games are not interesting in their own right. But I am going to separately make the argument that they're not interesting in their own right. I mean, even if you like NES games, you have to admit 80% of it ends up being total filler. The differences are purely cosmetic, and all these retro games are incestuous with their quote-unquote inspirations. The truth that no one is going to tell you, or tell themselves for that matter, is that none of this stuff has that much value today. I mean, I'm going to talk about it in more detail than most people care to, but I just want to spoil it now and tell you it really won't give you any special insight, not because there was something I missed, but because there's very little to be found. And I'm not going to bother waiting around to say this stuff later in the video when I have a good example, because I value my time, and even though this video is about 4 times longer than I originally wanted it to be, I want my audience to value their time too. And no, this still doesn't count as my opinion, it's just what I believe to be true, based on what I've been researching this whole time. The actual argument is whether or not video games are art now. It's very trivial to prove that, in the past, video games were not trying to be art by any stretch of the imagination. Every medium has gone through a period where they were accessible only to the rich, and patented by companies to squeeze as much cash out of the customer as possible. This is what retro games are indicative of, and I'm not going to apologize for saying that because it's the truth. Arcade games are nothing more than tech demos engineered to steal your quarters, and home console wasn't much better. Things improved very slowly, and only by SNES did video games take their very first steps. Games are very new, and I think accepting that and trying to show how we've changed is the path forward for making this all more commonly accepted. And one more thing, during this section I won't be using excerpts from Hyrule Historia directly, and I want to explain why. When Hyrule Historia goes over development history, it tends to gloss over those details very generally, and it's not even on par with some of the previous art books that have been released. A lot of the book is just a plot synopsis and other in-universe information. They do show insightful things, like concept art for example, but the artwork itself won't be dated or even signed, so Hyrule Historia isn't showing who made the concept art and when they made it, let alone explain why. It doesn't exactly give you an accurate understanding of how these games changed over time, which they did, just like how all media changes in development. So for this section, I'll instead be taking quotes from this ebook by Ishan Sariv, who has been absolutely prolific in supporting the popular fandom wikis for Zelda. And also give a quick shout out to shmupulations.com, which not only as a great source for Nintendo interviews, but also interviews of all sorts of games. Like, I found a ton of interviews for Fumito Ueda on this website, so they're very helpful as well. In any other scenario, fandom wikis are complete and total garbage. They don't even qualify as a source of information. Fandom wikis are infamous for cramming anything useful at the bottom of the page listed under trivia, because the people who try to popularize these things don't care about the storytelling merits of anything, and they don't care about the development of them. They just want a page that bullet points all the in-universe information, like who the character's uncle is, or what kingdom they're from, total escapist nonsense. But anyway, thanks to Ishan Sadiv, we actually do have a competent fandom wiki for Zelda that you can reference, and he's also organized all this information into an ebook that's 100% free of charge. So because of the situation at Nintendo right now, yes, the best history book in the series is written by a fan unofficially. If you're curious about Mr. Sadiv's credentials, that's a good question. I should probably look into that myself, but I have a blind spot in my research, and this video is still unfinished, so yeah. Our story begins in 1977. A young artist and toy designer named Shigeru Miyamoto joined Japanese toy maker Nintendo. Having impressed the company president Hiroshi Yamauchi with his work, Miyamoto was assigned to create artwork for an arcade game named Sheriff, wherein the player found themselves surrounded by bandits that needed to fend them off, in the process saving a young woman they captured. Sheriff was Nintendo's first damsel-in-distress game, a concept that Miyamoto would subsequently reuse across many of his later games. The first time Miyamoto had creative control over a game was, of course, with Donkey Kong, which started development as a tie-in with the Fleischer's Popeye cartoons, but Nintendo struggled with the license at first, so Nintendo ended up forcing Miyamoto's hand. Just a year later, they would get to release the Popeye game, though, which you can see here became the bones of Mario Bros. Arcade, quite obviously. Now, in hindsight, it's much easier for Miyamoto to say that he was proud of Donkey Kong. But we're going to see later, even though things are poorly documented at this time, he is, in fact, stretching the truth when he says that. The game that he wanted to make at the time was Popeye. We're going to see this behavior again later when we talk about the PR surrounding Skyward Sword. It's very evident that Skyward Sword was the game that the company was putting full confidence into while it was being made. But then, when fans decided those efforts were for naught, Nintendo immediately starts pretending like Skyward Sword is some kind of mistake. In full reality, it's blatantly obvious that everything they did in Skyward Sword was on purpose, and they just changed their official narrative on it to be in alignment with the fandom to get back in their good graces. So again, Donkey Kong at the time was a workaround. Avoiding one property led them in trouble with a different one later down the road. Which is how things always are, because companies think they can claim ownership of basic human rights like creativity. Drawing inspiration from the trio of Bluto, Popeye, and Olive, Miyamoto conceptualized 3 characters of his own, Donkey Kong, Jumpman, and a female character that most people know today as Pauline. Now, this Popeye stuff probably seems weird if you're a newer Nintendo fan and you only became aware of them from, like, Wii or even the Switch. But if you're a hardcore NES fan, you'll immediately recognize Popeye's appeal to union workers in the 1930s, compared to Mario's depiction in the movies and in the cartoon show. Contrary to popular belief, this vision of Mario isn't an invention of the West. It's actually just Shigeru Miyamoto's original vision for Mario on full display. As the games went on, Miyamoto became much more involved with the hardware and the company, and less involved with the games themselves. As a result of that, Takashi Tezuka actually took over for the games that were on the Famicom. So when Mario is jumping around in this high fantasy world with castles, mushrooms, and pipes, that's actually Takashi Tezuka's vision of Mario. That's the one most people are familiar with, and that's the one most prominently featured in the games. I'm not discrediting Miyamoto when I say that. It won't be much longer until the cat's out of the bag, but we're not there quite yet. This idea for Mario makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because these early games, Mario wasn't just a plumber, he was a carpenter, a lion tamer, he later becomes a doctor. He's jumping around from job to job just like Popeye would do, and just like an American tradesman would do in the 1930s. And also just like Americans would these days if we still had a stable economy. It's kind of interesting. The rare times that we get to see that part of Mario's conceptualization actually play out are personally pretty interesting to me. But of course, I got turned on to it by watching Vinesauce, which you already knew because you were paying attention, you smart cookie. Question I need to answer. Has Miyamoto been open about the fact that he let Tezuka take over? That would be an important thing to talk about right here. This is a pretty common thing we'll keep returning to, by the way. Whenever an artist at Nintendo retires to the role of producer, they start appearing in the promotional material more. So you will see Tezuka giving talks and interviews in the NES era, but they won't be as promoted as the ones that only have Miyamoto. And then later on, when Aonuma and Koizumi pass their torch, suddenly they're in a bunch of commercials and Nintendo Directs. This seems to really confuse people who refuse to pay attention to the credits. To that, I would say you should read the credits. The promotional material is not reflective of who actually made the game, obviously. So for 7 years, from 1977 to 1984, Mario did belong to Shigeru Miyamoto. But after that point, for all intents and purposes, the Mario that everyone's familiar with today is actually shaped by Takashi Tezuka, even though he didn't initialize those ideas. If you guessed that The Legend of Zelda was a similar story, you'd be right. The conceptualization of Zelda was initially kicked up by Miyamoto. His fondness for the damsel in distress setup also worked its way into Hyrule Fantasy. This time she's named Zelda, after Zelda Fitzgerald, the wife of F. Scott Fitzgerald, who authored The Great Gatsby. The Great Gatsby is a book that takes place in America in the 1920s, and deliberately and heavily focuses on classist struggles, just like Fleischer's Popeye does. So this is another little rare window into Miyamoto as an artist. Fitzgerald primarily drew from Zelda, his own wife, as his inspiration for the character Daisy, since the main character, Gatsby, spends the entire book being lovesick for Daisy. It's pretty interesting to learn this, because when you apply it back to Mario and Peach, you see the connection. Gatsby is filthy rich, but none of the money in the world could replace the way he felt about Daisy. I guess maybe it could be seen as old-fashioned by today's standards, but it's a sentiment I really enjoy. Gatsby was one of few books I really liked from high school literature class, and I wish that Miyamoto was more ambitious with his feelings about these ideas, because again, we don't really get to see them play out in any specific piece of Mario media out there.